We have to go. Now.
What's happening?
No time. Get in.
Okay.
The helicopter came in low over Manhattan on a Wednesday morning, its rotors cutting through the gray November sky like something that had no business being there. People on the street looked up. A few pointed. Someone filmed it on their phone without knowing what they were filming. On the rooftop of the Meridian Media Building, a woman stood in a faded camo jacket, her brown hair whipping in the rotor wash. Her boots steady on the gravel, as if she had stood in worse wind than this and had never once considered moving. A man in tactical gear leaned out of the open door. "Lieutenant Cole," he called. "Mission flag status." She didn't hesitate. "Active," she said. But that was Wednesday. This story starts on Monday, 8:45 in the morning, the first Monday of November. The kind of cold that hasn't decided yet whether it means business. Mia Cole walked into the lobby of Meridian Media's Manhattan offices carrying a cloth backpack with a frayed left strap and wearing sneakers that had seen better days 3 years ago. Her camo jacket was the kind of faded that doesn't come from a store. Her brown hair hung loose past her shoulders. Not styled, not messy, just there. The way things are when a person has stopped caring about appearances and started caring about other things entirely. She was 22 years old. She looked like she had taken a wrong turn somewhere between a bus stop and a better life. The lobby was all glass and chrome, and the kind of silence that cost money to maintain. A woman named Lena sat behind the reception desk, ponytail pulled tight, blazer, pressed sharp eyes on her screen before Mia had taken 3 steps inside. "Name?" Lena said, not a question, a transaction. "Mia Cole, I'm the new intern." Lena typed, paused, typed again. Her fingers slowed the way fingers slow when a screen shows something unexpected. For just a moment, barely a second, something on the monitor flashed red. Then it cleared itself. Gone. Like it had never been there. Lena looked up at Mia, then back at the screen, then at Mia again. "Corner chair," she said. "Someone will come get you." Mia walked to the corner chair and sat down. She set her backpack on her lap, both hands resting on the worn straps, and she looked at the room the way a person looks at a room when the room itself is the mission. She noted the fire exits, both of them. She noted the blind spot in the northwest corner where the ceiling camera didn't reach. She noted the rhythm of the floor, who moved fast and who moved slow, who talked too loud and who never looked up from their phones, who deferred and who decided. She had been reading rooms this way since she was 19, in rooms considerably less comfortable than this one. Near the far wall, a man named Garrett was running a mop along the baseboard. He was somewhere in his early 60s, gray-bearded, quiet in the way of people who learned a long time ago that quiet keeps you alive longer than noise ever does. He didn't look at Mia. He didn't look at the reception desk. He just moved the mop in slow, deliberate strokes, working his way down the wall. And then his fingers tapped twice on the handle. 2 taps, spaced, deliberate. Mia's eyes moved away from him without a pause, without a flicker, without any outward sign that she had heard or understood. She had heard. She had understood. Message received. Asset in place. You are not alone. The office came alive the way offices do on Monday mornings, all urgency and noise, and the performance of being busy for one another. Phones buzzed, heels clicked on hardwood, people threw around words like brand alignment and Q4 initiatives the way people throw punches when they want to look strong without making contact. A woman named Corinne held court near the center of the floor. Mid-30s blazer tailored to the inch, laughed like something sharp on something harder. She had the kind of confidence that comes not from earning anything, but from never once being told that she should have to. Her boyfriend Rhett sat nearby with gelled hair and a smartwatch that kept flashing notifications and teeth too white to be anything but intentional. They were the kind of couple that treated shared cruelty like a form of intimacy. Corinne saw Mia sitting in the corner. She leaned toward Rhett. "Did survival camp drop her off by mistake?" she said loud enough to carry. Rhett grinned. "She probably thinks this is a recruiting station." The laughter spread the way laughter does when people need permission and someone finally grants it, quick and sharp, catching from desk to desk like a spark crossing dry grass. Mia looked out the window. The Manhattan skyline sat there in the gray morning light, massive and indifferent. And she looked at it the way she looked at everything as terrain. Distance and elevation, obstacle and route. A man named Fletcher appeared from a nearby cubicle. Account manager, slick hair loafers that cost more than her monthly rent. He stopped in front of her and gave her the slow look over that was designed to make a person feel small, and he had used it enough times to know it usually worked. "What is this?" he said. "Field trip from boot camp." A few heads came up. Someone snickered. "We have a dress code here," Fletcher continued, warming to his audience. "Did you miss the memo? Or is this your way of standing out?" Mia kept her eyes on the window. I'm here to work, she said, low, even. Fletcher laughed and turned to Corinne. She's here to work. She looks like she's ready to dig a trench. More laughter. A few people in nearby cubicles who had been pretending not to listen stopped pretending. Mia stood. She adjusted her jacket. She picked up her backpack, and she walked toward the supply room with steps that didn't rush and didn't hesitate, and she didn't look back at any of them, and the laughter followed her down the hallway like weather she had already calculated for and decided was not worth adjusting her route. The team introduction was at 9:30 in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a mahogany table that probably had its own insurance policy. A man named Director Hargrove ran it. Wiry mid-40s, a squint like he was permanently calculating odds and finding them in his favor. He went through introductions the way a man goes through a grocery list, fast, functional, no sustained eye contact with anything he didn't consider worth his attention. When he got to Mia, he didn't look up from his notes. Mia Cole, temp intern, logistics or whatever. I'm here to assist with operations and supply chain coordination, Mia said. Her voice was clear. Hargrove waved a hand like he was erasing her. Just have her audit the supply inventory. He pointed to a stack of clipboards by the door. Stacks over there. In the back of the room, a woman named Vivian Diamond Bracelet scowl that could curdle cream leaned toward her neighbor. A place like this hires military interns now, she whispered. The room chuckled, cold and brief like a door opening onto winter. Mia picked up a clipboard. She walked out. Her sneakers made a faint sound on the polished floor, and behind her someone muttered something about the Army surplus vibe and more laughter followed. But a woman named Brennan watched Mia go. Project coordinator, bob haircut, a habit of turning her pen between her fingers when she was thinking. She didn't laugh. She didn't say anything. She watched the door close and then looked down at her notepad and wrote nothing on it for a long time, which was unusual for her because Brennan always had something to write. The supply room was small and climate-controlled and smelled like new cardboard, and the particular organized stillness of a space nobody considered important enough to pay attention to. Mia worked through the inventory list with the kind of focus that doesn't need music or company or the approval of anyone watching. Her hands moved. Her eyes moved. She counted and cross-referenced and noted discrepancies in handwriting so compact it looked like code. She paused once. She reached into her backpack and took out a small tin box. The metal was dented on one corner, the surface worn smooth where it had been handled so many times that the handling itself had become part of its shape. She opened it. Inside were two halves of a dog tag cut clean down the middle with a straight, purposeful cut. One half bore the name Sergeant D. Cole and the unit designation of Blackhawk 7 Alpha. The other half bore her own name, her own service number, the record of who she had been at 19 years old. She remembered the moment Danny had taken the wire cutters and done it standing in the back of a transport vehicle in the middle of a desert that wanted to swallow them whole, handing her his half with the specific solemnity of someone who understood the weight of symbols. So we always know where the other one is, he had said. She had both halves now. That was the problem with outliving the people who complete you. You end up carrying everything. She closed the box, she put it back in the bag. She thought about Danny Cole, who would have said something dry and precise about the particular irony of an Army-trained logistics specialist being assigned to count paperclips. Who would have said it without cruelty, only with the affectionate accuracy that had been his way of seeing the world. She thought about the report that came back 6 weeks after the red zone. The one that used words like supply chain failure and vendor accountability gap and equipment discrepancy at point of delivery, which were the bureaucratic translation of the fact that the weapons meant to protect the unit had not functioned the way weapons are supposed to function, and 3 people were dead because of it. And one of them was the man who had cut a dog tag in half in the back of a transport vehicle and given her a reason to keep reading the land. She wasn't here for recognition. She was here because Director Hargrove had signed a contract, and people had died because of what that contract funded, and no one had done anything about it. She had 72 hours. She picked up her clipboard. She kept working. At 10:15, the fire alarm on the 10th floor went off. High-piercing, the kind of sound that hits an office like a switch, thrown on everyone's patience simultaneously. People groaned, chairs scraped. Devin, the tech guy, lanky, and immediately exasperated, threw his hands up from across the floor. It's the relay again. 3rd time this week. We need the manufacturer 2 days minimum, maybe 3. The office buzzed with the frustration of people for whom inconvenience is the worst thing that happens in a given day. Mia set her clipboard down. She walked to the alarm panel on the wall near the supply room corridor and studied it for perhaps 5 seconds. Her head slightly tilted, eyes moving across the components, the way a reader's eyes move across a page they have read before. Then she popped the panel cover with one hand, reached into her pocket, and took out a ballpoint pen. One careful nudge, precise, knowing exactly where to apply exactly how much pressure. The alarm stopped. The silence was immediate and total. Every person within 20 feet was looking at her. Devin blinked. His vape pen dangled from his fingers, forgotten. "How did you—" "In the military, we had to fix these under fire," Mia said. She clicked the pen closed, slipped it back into her pocket, picked up her clipboard, and walked back toward the supply room. The room held its breath for 2 full seconds before Hank arrived. Facilities manager, built like a retired linebacker, voice like gravel in a tin drum. He stormed in from the service corridor, still read from a phone call, with the alarm company, looked at the panel, looked at Devin, and Corinne pointed at Mia before Devin could form a word. "She did it, with a pen." Hank turned. He assessed Mia with the look of a man who had decided the assessment before making it. "You think you're some kind of electrician now." He let out a laugh that bounced off the walls. "Next time, leave it to the professionals, kid." "It's fixed," Mia said without looking up from the inventory sheet. Hank shook his head and walked away. The room buzzed with whispers. A few people smirked. A few typed faster than necessary on their keyboards, which is what people do when they have witnessed something they don't have a category for and need to fill the space. On the far side of the room, through the glass partition separating the main floor from the finance corridor, a man named Colonel Aldrich stood in the doorway of his office. He was in his mid-60s. Gray hair, a slight limp from a wound that had never fully explained itself to anyone who asked about it. He kept a folded flag on his desk and never discussed it. He had spent 30 years of service and then 10 more in the private sector. And some days those two facts felt compatible, and some days they felt like two different men occupying the same body. He was watching Mia. Not the way the others watched her, not with amusement or the comfortable contempt of people who have never had to be competent under pressure. With something more careful. The quality of attention a man gives to something that reminds him of something he has spent a long time trying not to think about. She didn't see him. He stepped back into his office and closed the door. The break room at noon was bright and loud. The interns occupied it the way young people occupy spaces they assume were built for them. Corinne arrived with the design team, Madison, Ivy, and Sutton, all matching energy already mid-laugh before they sat. Mia was at the edge of a table near the window. Brown paper bag, lunch, water bottle. She ate without ceremony. Corinne leaned forward on her elbows and looked at Mia with bright theatrical interest. "So, what's with the camo going hunting after work?" Rhett laughed before the sentence was finished. Mia took a bite of her sandwich, chewed. "It moves better," she said. The table picked it up and ran with it, each person building on the last, the laughter growing with the specific momentum of people who have found something easy and are milking it. Mia let the noise roll over her, and only someone paying careful attention would have noticed the way her fingers tightened once on the paper bag. Just once. And then released. Madison had her phone out. She was already filming. "One day as a soldier," she announced to her live audience. "What's in that bag?" "Grenades, a compass." Ivy reached across, asked, laughing, not thinking, and grabbed the backpack from the empty chair beside Mia. Mia's voice came out low and immediate. "Careful, that's fragile." But Ivy already had it open. She pulled out the tin box and held it up to the camera. "What is this pirate treasure?" The live chat was already scrolling. Laughing emojis, comments lost in the Woods Vibes survival starter pack. Is she actually a Ranger Lowell? The lid wasn't fully closed. It shifted when Ivy tilted it toward the camera, and the two halves of the dog tag slid out and landed on the table with a sound that shouldn't have felt as loud as it did. The room didn't notice. The room was still laughing. But Mia's hand was already flat on the table, palm down, not moving. And something in her face had gone absolutely still. Not angry, not broken. The specific stillness of a person performing the discipline of not reacting because reacting costs something, and she had already paid more than enough. Ivy kept filming. "Ooh, military dog tag, is this actually yours? Give it back." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. There was something in those 3 words that changed the quality of the air. The way a drop in barometric pressure changes the air, your body knows it before your brain names it. Ivy paused, just a beat, then kept laughing, tilting the tag toward the camera. And Colonel Aldrich appeared in the doorway of the break room. He wasn't making a sound. He wasn't moving fast. He was simply there the way certain people are present in a room, weight preceding them, silence arriving with them. His eyes went directly to the dog tag on the table, to the unit designation on the metal face. to the specific combination of letters and numbers that appeared in exactly one document he had ever been asked to sign, a classified logistics subcontract that Hargrove had forwarded to him 2 years ago with a note that said, "Standard restructuring needs secondary authorization." He had signed it. He had signed it because Hargrove asked him to, and because he was 64 years old and 3 years from a pension he had spent decades earning. And he had told himself it was routine paperwork. Told himself he didn't need to read every line. He looked at the dog tag. He looked at Mia. She had not turned to look at him. She was still watching Ivy, her hands still flat on the table. Aldrich's face did something complicated, something that moved through several expressions and arrived at neutral, the way a man's face arrives at neutral when he has just understood something he cannot ununderstand. He turned. He walked back down the corridor to his office. He went inside and did not close the door all the way, and through the gap he sat at his desk and picked up his phone and held it without dialing the call he hadn't made 2 years ago, sitting in his chest like something that had been calcifying there ever since. He put the phone down. He sat with it. Mia took her backpack from Ivy without a word. She put the tin box back inside. She zipped the bag closed with a steady hand, gathered the remains of her lunch, stood and walked back to the supply room without looking at anyone. The live chat was still scrolling on Madison's phone. Garrett was in the corridor when Mia passed, running a cloth along the baseboard. He didn't look up, but his hand paused briefly as she went by. A small thing, almost nothing. Mia, who noticed everything, walked on. By 4 in the afternoon, Mia had completed 70% of the inventory and found 3 separate vendor invoices that didn't match their corresponding purchase orders. Individually, they looked like clerical errors. Together, cross-referenced against the delivery schedule, they were the surface of something larger and more deliberate, the kind of discrepancy that takes expertise to construct and expertise to find. She noted them in her notebook in handwriting so small it looked like code. She had 68 hours. At 5:50, Brennan walked past the supply room and saw the light still on. She stopped in the doorway. Mia was at the shelving unit, writing her pen, moving with the compact efficiency of a person who doesn't waste motion. She hadn't taken a break. She hadn't wandered. She hadn't done any of the things that interns do to fill the spaces between tasks. She just worked. Brennan stood there a moment. She thought about the dog tag at lunch, about the way Ivy had held it up and the room had laughed, and Brennan had sat at the adjacent table and said nothing, done nothing, and whether saying nothing was the same as choosing nothing, and whether choosing nothing was still a choice. She turned and walked back to her desk. She sat with that question until the floor went dark. Tuesday morning came in dark and cold. Mia was at her desk by 7:15, 45 minutes before anyone else on the floor arrived, in the half-light of the overhead panels, with her notebook open and her pen moving through the picture she was building. The office at that hour had a different quality. The chrome and glass of the place felt less like a performance and more like what it actually was. A building, holding its breath before the day began. She had spent the night going through what she had. 3 mismatched invoices, a vendor name appearing on 2 separate subcontracts under slightly different spellings, the kind of difference that looks like a typo and functions like a firewall. A delivery schedule with an 11-day gap in the middle of a Q2 cycle that no one had flagged because the final totals reconciled. On paper, everything added up. That was the point. That was always the point. She wrote a number in the margin. $2.3 million, spread across 14 months, 7 vendors, 4 divisions of a company that was itself a subsidiary of a holding entity incorporated in Delaware with a registered agent and no public-facing officers. She circled the number. She thought about what $2.3 million bought on the open market when the seller didn't ask questions. She thought about a red zone, about a supply chain failure, about 3 body bags in the report that used careful language to describe an outcome that had no careful edges. She closed the notebook when she heard the elevator. Garrett came in the way he always came in, quiet, purposeful, the cleaning cart rolling ahead of him down the corridor. He didn't look at Mia when he passed her desk. He never looked directly at her, but he slowed as he went by and set a cup of coffee on the edge of her desk without a word. Black, no sugar. Mia looked at the cup. She looked at Garrett's back as he moved away. She picked up the coffee and drank it and thought about what it meant that a man who had served in the Navy and ended up pushing a mop through a Manhattan media company would understand without being told exactly what kind of morning this was and exactly what it required. Some debts are paid in precisely this way, without ceremony, without anyone watching. She had 56 hours left. She kept working. At 7:30, Colonel Aldrich's door opened. He came out without his jacket tie loose, looking like a man who had either arrived very early or never left. He walked the corridor with his particular uneven stride and stopped at the entrance to the open floor. He looked at Mia. She looked at him. He walked to her desk. He looked around the floor, confirming it was empty, then pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He put one hand flat on the surface between them and looked at it, the way a man looks at something when he is organizing what he is about to say and wants to get it right. "Who sent you here?" he said. Not a question. "Nobody sends me anywhere," Mia said. He absorbed this. "Danny Cole was your CO." Also not a question. Mia's pen was still in her hand. She set it down. "He was more than that," she said. Aldrich looked at the surface of the desk. He had the hands of a man who had spent decades handling things that required precision, documents, decisions, the kind of things that couldn't be unmade once made. "I signed a subcontract 2 years ago," he said, "forwarded to me by Hargrove. I was told it was standard logistics restructuring." A pause that had the weight of 2 years in it. "I didn't read every page." The floor was very quiet. "I should have read every page," he said. Mia looked at him steadily. "People died because of what was funded through that contract," she said. Her voice was even. "Sir," the word landed between them like a stone, placed carefully rather than thrown. Aldrich didn't flinch. He had been a soldier long enough to know that accountability doesn't always arrive in a courtroom. Sometimes it arrives at 7:30 in the morning across a cluttered desk from a 22-year-old with a cloth backpack and eyes that have learned not to look away from difficult things. He stood. He straightened his tie. "Don't let them see you sweat," he said. He walked back to his office. He closed the door. Mia sat for a moment with her pen in her hand. She thought about what it costs a man of 65 with 30 years of service behind him and a pension ahead to sit down across from the person most affected by his mistake and say plainly, "I should have done better." She thought it probably cost more than most people would pay. She opened her notebook. She added one line. She kept working. The floor filled up by 9. The noise came back with it. Phones heals, the performance of Monday urgency carried over into Tuesday. Corinne arrived in a blazer the color of a bruise. Fletcher walked in with 2 coffees and gave one to no one, which felt like a personality statement. Hargrove moved through the floor with the ease of a man who has never once considered that the room might be watching him back. At 11, the marketing team hit a wall. The drone pilot hired for the Callaway account campaign had canceled. Something more lucrative had come up, which was the polite way of saying he didn't respect the deadline. The campaign was due to a client the next morning. Aerial footage was non-negotiable. Claire, the creative director, stood in the middle of the open floor looking at the drone on the conference table like it had personally let her down. Sutton spotted Mia passing with a stack of files. "Hey, Camo girl." Mia stopped. Sutton had the smile of someone who has located an audience. "You're all about the rugged life, right? Tell me you know something about drones." Rhett made a noise that was half laugh, half anticipation. A few heads turned. Mia looked at the drone on the conference table. She set her files down on the nearest surface. She walked over, picked up the unit, turned it in her hands, checked the gimbal calibration and the battery indicator and the signal output in about 12 seconds. She set it back down. She took out her phone. "I can sync this," she said. Rhett laughed. "Who do you think you are? Air Force." Mia didn't respond. She was already pairing the signal. What happened next stopped the room. She flew it without drama, without announcement, without any performance of what she was doing. The angles were smooth, the tracking was exact. She brought it low over the building model on the conference table and held it at a height and rotation that made the footage look like a production company's best work. Claire stood at her laptop watching the live feed and went very quiet, the quiet of someone revising an assumption they didn't know they were making. Mia landed it clean. Claire looked at the screen and then looked at the doorway where Mia had already picked up her files and was heading back to the corridor. "Where did you learn that?" Claire called. Mia didn't stop walking. "During an extraction mission," she said. "The room didn't fill back up with sound for several seconds." Claire turned to Devin, tilted her head toward the laptop. Devin came over and looked not at the footage but at the metadata, the flight parameters, the altitude precision, the stabilization specs. He knew drone systems. He had been building and testing them since his early 20s. What he was looking at matched the performance specifications of a military-adapted UAV system that cost $200,000 and required a specific federal license to operate. He looked at Claire. "Her file," she said quietly. Devin sat down and searched. HR system, background check portal, contractor onboarding, 3 different search parameters. He looked up. "It doesn't exist," he said. "There's no file in any civilian database." Claire looked at the drone footage on her screen for a long moment. Then she saved it to a private folder on her local drive. Not the shared server, her local drive. She closed the laptop. Brennan had watched all of it from her desk across the floor, the mockery that droned Claire's silence. Devin's expression when he said the file didn't exist. She was turning her pen between her fingers. She stopped. She looked at the corridor where Mia had gone. She kept thinking. At 3:15, Mia noticed her notebook had moved. She had left it on her desk at a specific angle. It was now positioned a few degrees off. Most people would not have noticed. Mia was not most people. She sat down and opened the notebook. On first inspection, nothing looked different. But she turned back 2 pages to the vendor connection map, the financial flow diagram, with Hargrove's name at the center and the holding company structure radiating outward, and found a faint impression on the corner of the page, the mark left by a phone held face down against paper. Someone had photographed it. She ran through the faces and timestamps and trajectories of everyone who had passed her desk in the last 2 hours. She narrowed it to 3 people. One of them was Hadley from HR, who had come by twice with the specific casual velocity of someone trying to look like they were going somewhere when they were actually stopping. She made a note. Then she did the math. If Hargrove knew he was being watched, the timeline accelerated. And if the timeline accelerated, she needed the vendor contracts, the original sub-agreements, with supplementary attachments showing destination accounts before he had a reason to move them. Those files required director-level clearance to access. She had one possible path to them, and it was not guaranteed, and it required patience. She was going to have to manufacture out of the 48 hours she had remaining. She was 22 years old, and she had kept 3 people alive in a red zone with 2 working radios and a compass. She could manage patience. She picked up her pen. She kept working. At 4 o'clock, the building's speaker system emitted a sound, faint, high-pitched, embedded beneath the ambient noise of the floor like something hiding inside the static. Most people registered it as a technical glitch, an irritation without a name, the kind of thing you feel before you hear. Mia heard it from across the floor. She stopped walking. She tilted her head. She listened for 3 seconds. "That's an Alpha Bravo call," she said. Her voice cut through the ambient noise of the open floor like a line drawn in the air. "Someone on the roof is broadcasting a distress signal." The room processed this for about 2 seconds and then laughed. Hargrove rolled his eyes from across the floor. "She thinks she's in an action movie." "Corinne, what's next?" Parachuting out the window. Rhett made a sound that was supposed to be devastating and mostly just confirmed his limitations. Mia was already moving toward the stairwell door. She was walking with the deliberate speed of someone who has made a decision and is acting on it with full commitment and no interest in what anyone thinks about that decision. She hit the stairwell door and pushed through. Behind her, the floor was still laughing. Brennan stood up. She wasn't sure why she did it. She hadn't planned it. It wasn't a decision that arrived in her brain before her body had already moved. She was at the elevator with her hand on the button before she had consciously chosen to be there. She pressed the button. The doors opened. She put her hand on the door and held it open. She stood there. She didn't know if it would matter. She didn't know if anyone would come. She just stood there with her hand on the door and thought about all the moments she had stood by and said nothing, and decided that this was not going to be one of them. Across the floor, Garrett had stopped polishing the baseboard near the print stations. He looked at Brennan, standing at the elevator with her hand on the door. He nodded once to no one in particular. He went back to work. In the stairwell, Mia took the stairs 2 at a time, backpack tight against her shoulders, breathing controlled mind already on the roof. She was on the 7th floor landing when she heard the door above her open. Sergeant Pruitt came down 3 steps and stopped. He was in his mid-40s buzz cut going gray, the kind of face that had spent years watching situations and making calls. He was blocking the upward path without quite blocking it, which is a specific thing that means something to someone trained to read the geometry of human bodies in space. "Stand down, Cole." Low, controlled, not hostile. Mia stopped. "Do to pullify operation," Pruitt said. "As of this morning, too much exposure, the drone footage, the alarm panel, the inventory work. You've been noticed. They decided the risk to the operation outweighs the remaining timeline." The stairwell was very quiet. "They're going to let him walk," Mia said. "Those are the orders." She looked at him. She reached into the front pocket of her backpack and took out the tin box. She held it in her hand, not opening it, just holding it, and she looked at Pruitt with the kind of directness that has nothing to do with aggression and everything to do with a decision that has already been made at a level deeper than conscious thought. "Danny Cole didn't get orders," she said. "He got a body bag." Pruitt looked at the tin box in her hand. Something moved across his face. Brief. Complicated. Not the thing he had been sent up these stairs to feel. He stepped to one side, one step. Enough. Mia put the box back in her pocket. She went up. The roof door opened onto cold air and the specific sharp blue of a November sky that had decided by afternoon to be beautiful despite itself. The distress signal was clear up here, a repeating short, long short on a frequency she had been trained to recognize before she was old enough to vote. A DoD agent was crouched near the northeast corner beside a compact transmitter unit, a man in a jacket that fit the way civilian jackets fit on people who don't normally wear them. He looked up when she came through the door. "Cole, you weren't supposed to come up here." "Noted," she said. "What's the flag status?" He studied her for a moment. Hargrove moved the timeline. "He's signing the new contracts Thursday morning, not Friday. You're down 30 hours. Mia looked out at the skyline. 30 hours. She had planned for 48. She thought about Danny in the back of the transport vehicle, finger moving along the topographic map. The land doesn't change. Your read of it does. Adjust. "I need the vendor contracts," she said. "On. Original sub-agreements with supplementary attachments. Destination accounts. Those require director-level clearance." "I know. You don't have director-level clearance." "I know that too," she said, "but someone does." She turned and went back through the door. Back on the floor, the laughter had moved on. Mia walked to her desk and sat down and opened her notebook and looked at the vendor map with the new timeline imposed on it. One path, one person with director clearance who already knew why she was here, who had been sitting with his mistake for 2 years, who had come to her desk at 7:30 that morning and said, "I should have read every page." She looked at the closed door of Aldrich's office. She didn't go knock on it. She picked up her pen and she waited, because patience is also a skill. In some situations require you to let other people arrive at their own decisions in their own time, rather than pushing them toward a door they need to open themselves. She had 30 hours. She waited. At 5:45, Aldrich's office door opened. He walked out with his jacket on and his briefcase in hand. He crossed the floor toward the elevator, passing Mia's desk, and he slowed. He stopped. He stood there with his briefcase at his side and looked at the open notebook, at the fraction of the vendor map visible on the page, the connecting lines between vendor names and holding entities, the financial architecture of a fraud that had been running for 14 months. A man who had spent 30 years reading strategic documents understood what he was looking at, even from a partial angle. "The sub-agreements," he said, low, flat. "You need the supplementary attachments." Mia looked at him. "You have 30 hours, he said. She said nothing. He looked at the notebook. He looked at the quarter. He looked back at her. "There's a scheduled compliance review tomorrow morning," he said. 8 o'clock, director level. "I'll be pulling vendor files for cross-reference." He picked up his briefcase. "Standard procedure. Happens quarterly." He walked to the elevator. The doors opened. He went inside. The floor was loud around them, and no one had watched the exchange. No one had heard it. Mia looked at her notebook. She thought about what it costs a man to choose the right thing 30 hours before the consequence and 2 full years after the mistake. She closed the notebook. She put on her backpack. She walked to the elevator and pressed the button and waited. And the city outside the windows was going dark in sections, one building at a time, and she looked at it as terrain and calculated the distance she still had to cover and found it manageable. 30 hours. She stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. Wednesday came in cold and clear. The kind of November morning where the sky is too blue for the season and the light hits the glass towers of Manhattan at an angle that makes everything look like it has an edge. Mia was on the roof at 6:15. Not because she had been called there, but because she needed to see the terrain from above before she went back down into it, a habit formed in places that demanded it and never quite unwound after. The city spread in every direction, massive and continuous, doing what cities do. She put her hand over the outside of her jacket pocket. The tin box was there. She held her hand against it for a moment, not to take it out, just to confirm the weight of it. 22 hours. She went back inside. At 7:55, she was at her desk when the compliance review began. Through the glass partition, she could see Aldrich at his computer, pulling files with the methodical pace of standard procedure, except that the files he was pulling were not summary documents, but original sub-agreement packages, with all attached documentation, the kind of deep retrieval that happens not quarterly, but when someone has a reason. No one on the floor looked. No one looked because He was a senior director doing what senior directors do. And the floor had learned long ago not to spend attention on things that didn't concern them. By 8:45, a plain manila envelope appeared on the corner of Mia's desk. No ceremony, no eye contact, no words. She picked it up. She felt the shape of the USB drive inside it. She put it in her backpack. She went back to work. At 9:30, Hargrove called the weekly team meeting. He ran it the way he always ran it, fast, self-satisfied, impatient with nuance. When he got to logistics, he didn't look at Mia. Inventory audit status, he said to the table. Complete, Mia said. 3 vendor invoice mismatches in the Q2 cycle. Documented and ready to forward to accounting. Hargrove shrugged. Send them over. He moved on. Mia looked at her notebook. She thought 20 hours. She thought it's already done. She closed the notebook. At 11:15, Brennan appeared at the edge of Mia's desk. She stood there a moment before speaking, which was a thing about Brennan. She didn't fill silence with noise. I looked up the vendor names from the invoice copies, she said. The ones from the Q2 cycle. She paused. 3 of them traced back to the same registered agent in Delaware. Mia studied her face. I don't know exactly what that means, Brennan said, but I know it's not a coincidence. Why are you telling me this? Brennan looked at the worn strap of Mia's backpack hanging off the chair. She looked at the outline of the tin box in Mia's jacket pocket. She looked up. Because I didn't say anything for 2 days, she said. And I think that was a choice. And I think choices have weight whether you make them out loud or not. The floor moved around them, busy with itself, paying no attention to this corner of it. Is there anything I can do? Brennan said. Mia looked at her for a long moment. Not right now, she said. But don't go far. Brennan nodded. She went back to her desk. She did not turn her pen. At 1:15, the building's PA emitted a faint specific frequency. Mia heard it from the filing corridor. She stopped. She listened for 3 seconds. She walked to the stairwell door and pushed through and went up. The roof was cold in the afternoon light. The DOD agent was there, 2 additional people with him, now both in civilian clothes that fit incorrectly. And coming in low from the north, rotors audible before it cleared the building edge, the Blackhawk. She walked forward into the rotor wash without hesitating. The agent looked at her. Cole, I have the documentation, she said. She took the manila envelope from her backpack and handed it to him. He opened it. He looked at the USB drive. He pulled a printed summary page she had prepared, 1-page 12-point font, the kind of document that takes 6 hours to write and looks effortless. He read it. He looked up. There are 2 signatures on the sub-agreement attachment, he said. Hargrove and a secondary signatory, Colonel Aldrich. The rotor wash moved through the space between them. I know, Mia said. Both signatures are on record. Both are legally binding. I know that too. The agent looked at her steadily. Aldrich is 65, career military. 1 signature on a document he claims he didn't fully review. The DA will have to, is he being charged? Not a question, a line drawn. The agent measured his words. That decision isn't yours to make. Mia looked at him without blinking. What he did this morning, she said, the compliance review, the files he pulled and documented under his own name. That was voluntary. That was a man of 65 with a pension and a career and every reasonable incentive to do nothing, choosing to put his name on the right side of this at the last possible moment. She paused. Make sure that's in the record. Both signatures, both sides of the ledger. The agent held the page. That's not usually how. I know how it usually works, she said. I'm telling you how this one works. A long beat passed between them. He folded the page and put it back in the envelope. Understood, he said. Mia reached into her backpack one final time. A second envelope, thinner, sealed. She looked at it for a moment before she held it out. This goes to Brennan, she said. Project coordinator, 4th floor. She doesn't know it's coming. He took it. She nodded once. The Blackhawk door was open. The man in tactical gear was leaning out. Lieutenant Cole, mission flag status. Mia looked at the door. She looked at the city, spread below her, at the glass and steel of it, the movement and mass of it, all those people going about their days inside buildings that held more than they knew. She thought about Danny Cole cutting a dog tag in half in the back of a transport vehicle and handing her the half with his name on it and saying, so we always know where the other one is. She thought, I know where you are, Danny. I know exactly where you are. Active, she said. She climbed in. The door slid shut. The rotors increased and the helicopter lifted off the roof and banked south over the skyline and was gone. Downstairs, the floor heard it before they saw it. The sound came through the windows first, that low rhythmic thudding that registered as helicopter before anyone had time to decide whether to care. Heads came up from screens. Someone went to the window, and then they saw it. The Blackhawk clearing the rooftop edge, banking hard, the tactical markings on its side visible from the street-facing windows. Phones came out immediately. Corinne pressed her face to the glass. "There's someone on the roof." Someone pulled up the building security feed on the facilities monitor, and there it was, rooftop camera time-stamped, showing Mia Cole standing in the rotor wash handing something to a man in a dark jacket and then walking toward the open door of a military helicopter, and then the door closing, and then the helicopter gone. "That's her," Corinne said. Her voice had lost something. The bright theatrical confidence had gone out of it, and what was left was smaller and less certain. "That's the intern," Rhett said, as if saying it would make it make sense. Hargrove came out of his office at the sound of raised voices. He crossed to the window. He looked at the monitor. He looked at the helicopter, banking over the skyline. His face changed in the way faces change in reality. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly and incompletely. The particular expression of a man who has believed for a very long time that he was the most strategic person in any given room and is arriving late at the realization that he was wrong. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. He answered. He listened for 4 seconds. He put the phone on the nearest desk and stood there with his hands at his sides. The news broke at 2:15. Someone had tagged the helicopter footage on social media before it even landed, and by the time the Blackhawk had cleared the skyline, the clips were circulating. A journalist who covered defense issues recognized the Blackhawk's 7 Alpha insignia on the door panel and made the connection in under an hour. Then the older footage started surfacing. A clip from 3 years ago, grainy and partially redacted, showing a 19-year-old woman in tactical gear in a headset standing in a trench with explosions lighting up the background behind her, her voice coming through the radio frequency, calm and specific and unhurried, coordinating an evacuation with the certainty of someone who has decided that panic is not an option and has made that decision so completely it never needs to be made again. A second clip, a sandstorm, a convoy stopped on a desert road. The same young woman walking the line of vehicles, checking each one, pointing, directing, her voice barely audible over the wind, but the people around her responding to it like it was the only sound in the world that carried any meaning. The headline hit the major outlets at 2:45. Blackhawk 7, Alpha youngest tactical commander in unit history, resurfaces in New York. The floor of Meridian Media read it in real time and went quiet in the particular way of people who are revising everything they thought they knew about the last 72 hours. Hadley from HR had both hands over her mouth. Madison and Ivy and Sutton were clustered around a monitor, watching the evacuation footage loop. Not laughing. Devin sat with the expression of a man replaying a conversation in his head and identifying every moment he missed the thing that was right in front of him. Fletcher had gone quiet in the way of people who made a lot of noise when they felt safe. Corinne stood at her desk and looked at the footage of the 19-year-old in the trench. She looked at it for a longer time now. She thought about the break room on Monday, the dog tag on the table, the way the room had laughed and the way she had made it laugh deliberately because it was easy and because she was good at it and because it had never once cost her anything. She thought about what it had cost someone else. She sat down. She said nothing. In the absence of performance, something true about her remained smaller than she would have liked and more honest than she was comfortable with. By 4 o'clock, Madison's One Day as a Soldier live stream had accumulated 300,000 views, not because people found it funny, but because the comments had turned. The clip of Ivy holding the dog tag played in feeds directly next to the evacuation footage, and the contrast required no caption. Madison's brand sponsorship pulled out by Thursday. Ivy's account went private. Sutton deleted her post without explanation, which was its own kind of explanation. Vivian sat at her desk, turning her diamond bracelet on her wrist, running the calculations she should have run 18 months ago when she signed a contract she hadn't read because Hargrove had told her it was routine and she had been busy and had trusted him. The investigation would eventually determine she had been negligent rather than complicit. The distinction mattered legally. It did not make the weight of it lighter. The FBI arrived at 3 o'clock. 2 agents in suits that fit correctly with the patience of people who have done this enough times to know that urgency is theater and deliberateness is real. They went to the executive corridor. They knocked on Hargrove's office door. He was still inside. He opened the door. He looked at them. He stepped back. They went in. The floor watched through the glass in the helpless silence of people who are witnessing something they cannot stop and are only now understanding they were standing next to it the entire time. At 3:45, the agents came out. Hargrove came with them. He walked the length of the floor in a suit that cost $4,000 past the desks of people who had laughed at an intern's camo jacket 72 hours earlier. He did not look at any of them. None of them looked at him. The elevator arrived. It arrived. The doors closed. Then Aldrich's door opened. He walked out alone, jacket on, briefcase in hand, looking around the floor once the way you look at a space you have occupied for a long time, when you are leaving it and you know you are leaving it. His eyes moved across the desks, across the window, across the space where Hargrove's office door now stood open and empty. They stopped at Mia's desk. It was empty. The chair tucked in, the surface clear. The completed inventory reports stacked and labeled in the corner with the precision of someone who paid attention to how they left a space. And placed near the center of the desk, set down with care, the two halves of the dog tag. Both halves. Aldrich stood at the desk. He looked at the metal pieces on the surface and understood what they meant. That she had decided somewhere between the rooftop and the helicopter door that she did not need to carry both halves anymore. That the weight she had been carrying, the accounting for Danny Cole, the mission, the 3 years of it was done now. Set down, completed. That she was leaving the rest of it here for the person who still had more to carry. He reached out and picked them up. He held them both in his palm, the worn metal, the cut line, the names on each half. He looked at them for a long time. He closed his hand. He put them in his breast pocket. He stood there with his eyes closed, and his fists closed, and whatever he was doing in that moment, he was doing it alone, in the way that certain reckonings can only happen alone. A man of 65 at a desk that belonged to a 22-year-old who had come here to finish something he had failed to prevent. He opened his eyes. He walked to the elevator. He went inside. He did not come back out. Brennan was at her desk when her computer pinged. She looked at the screen. An email from a federal government domain she didn't recognize. Subject line blank. She opened it. A commendation for service to a federal compliance investigation. A recommendation forwarded through appropriate channels for a position as compliance officer with the Department of Defense Contractor Oversight Division. Start date, salary, a contact name, and at the bottom in the field marked referred by a single name, Monsieur Cole. Brennan read it twice. She looked at the empty desk across the floor. She thought about the elevator on Tuesday afternoon, her hand on the door, not knowing if it mattered, not knowing if anyone would come through, doing it anyway, because she had decided she was not going to be the person who stood by one more time. And she thought about this, that Mia had done this before she got on the helicopter, before she knew whether Brennan had held the door or not, before she had any reason to know what Brennan would choose. She had made the recommendation anyway, based not on what Brennan had done, but on what she had seen in her, the stillness at the lunch table, the moment she didn't laugh, the quiet 2-day accumulation of a person deciding who they were going to be. Brennan pressed reply. She typed, "I'll be there." She sent it. She sat with that for a moment, the particular feeling of a door opening that you didn't expect to find unlocked. Then she turned off her monitor, gathered her things, and went home. Garrett was cleaning the break room at 4:30 when Corinne came in. She was alone. She moved without her performance, which was its own form of honesty. She poured a cup of coffee she didn't seem to want and stood at the counter looking at it. Garrett ran the mop across the tile in slow, even strokes. He didn't look at her. He wasn't ignoring her either. He was simply present the way he was always present, occupying his space with the undemonstrative solidity of a man who has made his peace with what he is and what he is not. "We didn't know who she was," Corinne said. Garrett kept mopping. "We were just—" She stopped. She set down her coffee. "It wasn't supposed to be." "She knew what she was walking into," Garrett said. His voice was even. "No performance in it, because the kind of judgment that matters doesn't need one." Corinne looked at him. "The real question," he said, "is what did you walk away from?" He set the mop against the wall. He picked up his cleaning cloth. He moved to the counter and began wiping it down. Corinne looked at her coffee for a long time. She didn't have an answer that satisfied her. She walked out of the break room and down the corridor to her desk and sat there for the rest of the afternoon, not performing anything, which was in its small and incomplete way the beginning of something that might eventually become something else. At 5 o'clock, Sergeant Pruitt sat alone in the security office. He had pulled up an earlier timestamp on the monitor. Monday morning, 8:45. He watched Mia Cole walk through the lobby doors in her camo jacket and cloth backpack. He watched her give her name to Lena. He watched her walk to the corner chair and sit down with her backpack on her lap and both hands on the worn straps. He had already watched this twice. What he kept coming back to was the 30 seconds before the floor came alive, before the noise arrived, before the day officially began. 30 seconds with the lobby empty and no audience and nothing to perform for. In those 30 seconds, Mia Cole looked at the floor of the building she was about to spend 72 hours inside. And for just a moment, Brief controlled the compression of a person allowing themselves exactly as much as they can afford. Her eyes went bright, not tears. The precursor to them shut down before they arrived. She blinked, her face went steady. She looked at the window. Pruitt watched this on the monitor until he had seen everything in it there was to see. He thought about the stairwell, the tin box in her hand. Danny didn't get orders, he got a body bag. He thought about stepping aside and whether that one step at the last possible moment balanced against the order he had been sent up those stairs to enforce. He suspected the answer was complicated and would take longer than one afternoon to settle. He suspected she would have understood that too. He turned off the monitor. He sat in the quiet room for a while. Then he turned it back on and watched the floor because the floor still needed watching. And that was his job. And doing your job well on the day after something large has happened is its own kind of answer to the question of who you are. Owen was behind the counter at the ground floor coffee shop at 6 in the evening when his phone buzzed with a news alert. He looked at the photo that accompanied the headline. He looked at it for a long time. He had served Mia Cole coffee every day for 3 days. Always the same order, black, no sugar. Exact change on the counter before he had finished typing it in. He had asked her once what her deal was, because she had the particular quality of someone carrying something that didn't fit the space they were in, and she had said just passing through. He thought about that now. He thought about the precision of it, not sad, not resigned, not performing anything. Just accurate. The specific truth of a person who knows exactly where they are in a longer movement and accepts the temporariness of each position because the movement is what matters, not the position itself. He put his phone in his pocket. He looked out the window at the street. The November evening was coming down fast, the light going blue-gray. The city moving the way it always moves, absorbing, continuing, making room without ceremony for whatever comes next. A man walked past with a dog. A woman in a yellow coat talked on her phone. A cab went by with its light on, looking for the next person who needed to go somewhere. None of them knew, and that Owen thought was the thing about people like her. The thing nobody talks about and almost nobody understands until it is standing right in front of them in a faded camo jacket and scuffed sneakers, and they are too busy performing their own importance to see it. The world runs on people who don't need you to know their name. People who show up and do the work and carry the weight and ask for nothing except the chance to finish what they started. People who are just passing through and leave the place better than they found it and are gone before you think to say thank you, and you are left standing in the quiet. They leave behind trying to understand who you are in a story you didn't know you were part of. He picked up a cloth and wiped down the counter. He thought, if you have ever carried something nobody else could see, if you have ever walked into a room where nobody knew your name and done what needed doing without asking to be recognized, then you already know what this story was about. And if you have been the room, if you have been the laughter, the dismissal, the comfortable cruelty of people who mistake loudness for importance and performance for strength, then maybe this is the moment you decide what you walk away from. She didn't need them to understand her. She needed them to be safe. That is what Danny Cole taught her in the back of a transport vehicle in the middle of a desert, his finger moving along the contour lines of a map, his voice patient and certain, and already becoming the thing she would carry long after he was gone. If you can read the land, nobody can lose you. She had read it. She had carried it. She had set it down on a desk in a Manhattan office building and walked away without looking back. And somewhere in the city, she was already reading the next map, already adjusting her route, already doing the work that needed doing in a room where nobody knew her name. The counter was clean. Owen turned off the lights. He locked the door. He went home.